Cancellation of the North Korean summit, a quote, sad moment in history. So here's a question. How do we get from the talk of a Nobel Peace Prize to the president's decision to walk away? I have a great team here to break all of it down. But first, I want to take a look at exactly where things stand. The president says right now the canceled summit looks like a missed opportunity, but he's not willing to give up on it completely. Take a listen.
If and when Kim Jong-un chooses to engage in constructive dialogue and actions, I am waiting. A lot of things can happen, including the fact that perhaps, and would wait, it's possible that the existing summit could take place or a summit at some later date.
North Korea also left the door open for more negotiations, releasing a statement that said in part, quote, we would like to make known to the U.S. side once again that we have the intent to sit with the U.S. to solve problems regardless in any way at any time. And less than 1 hour ago, President Trump responded, tweeting very good news to receive the warm and productive statement from North Korea. We will soon see where it will lead, hopefully, to long and enduring prosperity and peace. Only time and talent will tell. It is still unclear if things can get back on track. But if there's one thing that has remained consistent throughout this process, is that things happen very quickly. Remember, it was less than a year ago that President Trump was calling Kim Jong-un the rocket man. Then, in early March, the White House suddenly announced the two men had agreed to meet. Over Easter, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo met with Kim personally to lay the groundwork for the summit. And less than 3 weeks later, North Korea announced a freeze on missiles and nuclear tests. And then, on April 27th, North and South Korean leaders held their own historic summit meeting at the DMZ. On May 10th, the North made another goodwill gesture, freeing 3 Americans that had been held. Earlier that day, the president had used a cabinet meeting to talk up the buzz about a Nobel Peace Prize. Everything seemed to be going spectacularly well. Then suddenly, it began to fall apart. On May 16th, North Korea suspended talks with North Korea because of joint military drills with the United States. And over the last week, as the administration tried to figure out the North's strategy, the president admitted the summit, well, it might not happen. On Thursday, he then decided to pull the plug himself rather than risk North Korea doing it first. The whole thing lasted 78 days, beginning to end. That's less than 3 months. By comparison, the Obama administration spoke with Tehran for more than 2 years before signing the nuclear deal. But as I said, the process started suddenly and ended suddenly. In fact, when the president decided to cancel the summit, it took U.S. allies and even some members of the president's own team completely by surprise. I want to bring in NBC's Pentagon correspondent, Hans Nichols, and NBC national political reporter, Carol Lee. Carol, to you first. You have laid out an extraordinary piece here about how this whole thing fell apart. Walk us through it.
Sure. Well, what we know from our reporting is that there was tensions between the State Department and the president's national security advisor over the weeks in which they were trying to plan for this summit. The State Department officials wanted to lay more groundwork for this. They wanted more advanced preparations. And, one official described it to my colleague Courtney Kuby as trying to herd cats in terms of planning this summit out. And, separately, you have just general sort of suspicion on the part of folks like Mike Pompeo of the president's national security advisor, John Bolton, who has a long track record of being against any diplomacy with North Korea and, has advocated for regime change. And then on the other side, you have Pompeo, who's spent a lot of time invested in this process. He's been to Pyongyang twice. He's met personally with Kim. And so there was some tensions there and then suspicions on the part of Pompeo thinking that Bolton was out to kind of torpedo this summit and to find a way for it not to work. And we know that he was instrumental in among those who convinced the president ultimately to pull out of the summit.
Hans, I want you to speak about how sudden all of this was. Yesterday, as it was happening, we discussed the shock from President Moon and others in South Korea. And we need to remember that while the president sent this letter out, there are Western journalists, journalists from the United States in North Korea who were there to watch this nuclear test site be taken apart.
Look, this makes the challenge for General Brooks, who is in Korea, South Korea, that much more difficult. Overnight, Stephanie, he hinted at this. He said that Korea is not the land of morning calm, but morning surprises. So what you saw from a general was an attempt at diplomacy, trying to make sure that the relationship between South Korea and the U.S. remains strong. In some ways, the tweet that the president sent out an hour beforehand, that was almost telegraphed by General Brooks, saying that, look, it's not over until it's over. He said there might have been some premature celebration. There's a lot of hard work to be done. But General Brooks remains optimistic that you can have some sort of summit. I will say that we don't have an ambassador to South Korea. The gentleman that's been tapped for that, Admiral Harry Harris, he's actually General Brooks's boss right now, oversees the entire Western Pacific, all of the Pacific, really, in terms of military forces. But it's something similar we've seen at the Pentagon, where you see Secretary Mattis being put in the role of a diplomat, not necessarily a warrior, and you see strong diplomatic language coming from the generals. That's not a bad thing, but it does show you the sense that many of them are dual-hatted. Stephanie?
It also shows that it's really difficult for them, seeing that they don't know what the president's next move is going to be. Hans, thank you. Carol, stick around. I want to bring my panel in. Michael Allen, a special assistant to President George W. Bush and former member of the National Security Council. Jason Johnson, politics editor at TheRoot.com. And Rick Tyler, Republican strategist. Let's walk through this. Michael, to you first. Is there a chance the summit could be saved, especially since we last heard a somewhat positive statement from North Korea?
I think so. I think the president may be trying to get a little bit more leverage here. I think that what they realized is that we were not set up for success. It would have been a win for the North Koreans to have beautiful pictures coming out with the United States and the North Korea meeting. And it was dawning on the president that, listen, at best, we were going to get a piece of paper about, getting rid of nuclear weapons years down the road. I think that would have eroded our position on sanctions vis-a-vis the Chinese, who we need them to apply maximum pressure. So I think they realized this was getting out of hand. Let's try and get some leverage and back out of this and maybe put it back on for later.
All right, let's share what Lindsey Graham said earlier on today and remind you, it was Lindsey Graham in the last couple of weeks that was so happy with the progress being made. He was one of the people who said President Trump should get a Nobel Peace Prize.
It's going to end one way or the other. That's all you need to understand. If military action is required, they're going to lose. It will be devastating to the region. If there's a war, it's going to be in China's backyard. I can't stress enough to you how much I've talked to him. It's not if it ends, it's how it ends. And when does it end? I think it's going to happen in his first term, one way or the other. The best way for it to end is a peace treaty with the North Koreans, South Koreans, and the Chinese and us.
But it makes it sound easy, like you're going to drop a bomb on North Korea and that's the end of that.
There's nothing easy, but it's the end of them.
Rick, are we closer to a war with North Korea than we were 3 months ago?
No, I don't think so. I think, for all the talk about he's fairly predictable and certainly rational. I mean, it takes some discipline to get a nuclear weapon in the first place and to develop an intercontinental ballistic missile. But if you view this whole process, it's just a different process. And I think we do have a chance that it will come back to the table. But all of this public diplomacy from Pompeo and disagreeing with Bolton. This is now a public fight.
But they're choosing to make it a public fight. John Bolton is going on television.
On the same page. I mean, Pompeo did the most to advance this whole thing forward by far, right? And then Bolton seemed to blow it up with the help of the vice president. Now, I do think it's right that if Trump goes to South Korea, that ultimately Ung would have a great photo up there. Look, the United States came because we have a nuclear weapon. But look, the process is going to go back. The North Koreans want to have a deal. The problem is that the way he withdrew it, it's this weird reason, right? It's not like you feel like the president.
You were mean to Mike Pence, like that would upset the president.
It's like the president, all of a sudden, it's like he doesn't really want world peace. He wants to, get a Nobel Peace Prize, or he wants to take credit or look better than the other presidents. That has nothing to do with what we're trying to do here. Yet that's the game they're in. And so he withdraws this letter. And who gets cut out? The South Koreans got really hurt in this. And whether you like Moon or not, he ran his whole campaign that we're going to do something with North Korea. We're going to work toward world peace. And now all of a sudden, without any warning at all, they just cut their knees out. And you can't do it without China, period.
This is like, you've got two people that everybody really wanted them to go on a date, but they didn't really want to go, and they keep trying to come up with excuses to get out of it, and then eventually someone comes up with something petty and says, we can't do it. But hey, everybody, look, we are going to get together just after the holiday, because that's essentially what happened. You have Pompeo, again, who's like, look, this is something that can happen. You have South Korea, who says, look, this can happen. You have Europe, you even have Putin saying, yeah, you guys should have gone through with this deal. I don't necessarily think that Trump wants to go through a deal where he can't come out with some massive PR victory, and that's not going to happen when you're negotiating with another world leader. So I don't think we're in a greater risk of war. I don't think that we're going to be dropping bombs in the first term the way that Lindsey Graham seems to be suggesting. But I do think more prep is needed. I think the North Koreans, by skipping meetings, were making this a bit problematic. I think Donald Trump didn't know what he was going to say, and that's why they're backing out of the date.
Can you walk me through, Carol, why we weren't coordinated? Why is John Bolton going on TV saying, let's go the way of Libya, when he's clearly not on the same page as Mike Pompeo? And whether we're talking about North Korean negotiations or President Trump's economic team and trade, why aren't we getting on the same page before opening the front door?
Because that's just not how this White House functions. This is a president who agrees to do something and then tries to figure out how he's going to get there. This president who nominates
that's how you end
people
up with more than 6 corporate bankruptcies.
So, but that's how we're here. And I think that the president, I would argue that the president really wanted this to happen and still does very much want this to happen and envisions this as being a huge win for him and basically something that he can say he did that his predecessors weren't able to do and boast about that. I do think that, and if you're going to look at sympathize with them a little bit, the North Koreans weren't responding to them. So in some ways, they set the president sets these expectations really high and says that this is going to work, talks about a Nobel Peace Prize, and then North Korea is not answering their phone calls and is standing them up at meetings. And so in that sense, I think the president really wanted this, but also more so didn't want to get punked.
Listen, I'd break up with somebody if I thought they were about to break up with me when they're on their way over. But in all seriousness, this isn't about a breakup or a date. Michael, help us understand from a historical perspective the consequences of acting on foreign policy without thinking it through.
Well, that usually doesn't end well. I mean, we cannot do this on the fly. It can't be done out of your hip pocket. These things need to look back at the historical record. In this case, with the North Koreans, we have a couple of decades of this. They love signing up to pieces of paper that are, in a sense, unverifiable, and we can't make good on them, and they get economic concessions in the meantime. So these are very tough folks. I think we got ahead over our skis, and we're pulling back a little bit. It doesn't look pretty. I will say, though, there is an interesting wrinkle here. If you look at the talking points and what the White House is saying, they're saying the president got some feel from China, or at least that China may have played some role in the new, let's call it, lack of enthusiasm out of North Korea after Xi Jinping met with Kim Jong-un a second time very recently. So there's more to come out here about maybe what was in the White House calculus, and so we'll see, I guess, here in coming days.
If that's the case, the team working on trade, i.e. Larry Kudlow, who doesn't like tariffs, who doesn't want a trade war, that's not good news for his road ahead. Rick, we can criticize what's happened for the last 24 hours all day long, but there are 3 Americans that came home over a week ago.
And there was one American who was beaten to death and came home in a coma, so essentially he was beaten to death. Look, I'm glad they came home. Everybody's glad they came home. But they shouldn't have been prisoner in the first place.
They shouldn't have been prisoner in the first place. But while we say what a huge disaster this has been for the White House, has it been? Because the Mike Pompeo meeting was a big deal, and bringing those 3 detainees home was huge.
Until they capture 3 more.
Yeah, I mean, and look, bringing in a bunch of journalists seems nice at the surface, but, blowing up one facility that we can't properly inspect doesn't necessarily mean that North Korea is going to be a good actor or act in good favor down the road, and that's the problem here. If no one has any trust, if foreign leaders, if Abe in Japan is like, wait, I put myself on the line for this, if in South Korea the president's like, I put myself on the line for this, and no one is backing me up, we're not in a better position because other people in the coalition don't want to work with us.
All relationships begin with trust. You have to have trust among the region, and like I said, you can't do this without China, because China holds all the cards here. China can say to North Korea, do what we want, or we will make it extremely difficult for you. They can, we can't, I don't know whether we can do anything more to North Korea. China can do everything to North Korea.
Okay, then, Carol, last point. If you're talking about we need these other nations to trust us, you've got a White House where people don't trust one another. So while you worked on this story, just help us understand the distrust within the president's own team, because that's where things are rotten to start.
That's where it starts. That's absolutely right. There's just there's distrust among different advisors. There's also, you know, when you're working for someone who has one feeling one moment and another one the next, and is tweeting, it's very difficult to try to make all of this kind of happen. And you raised the issue of Iran earlier in those talks. You know, the Obama administration got all of these countries together, and there was a built-up trust among the negotiating countries and a distrust still of Iran. And so it was this different kind of dynamic, and you haven't seen that yet. This president has not built a circle of trust among America's allies as they go into these talks. He was doing it very unilaterally, and that's one thing that we wonder if that'll change in the next round.
You and I both know from the amount of leaks inside the administration, he hasn't built a circle of trust within his own team. Thank you so much. We've got to move forward.